When I first started working, there were only 4 people in air quality. W.E. Knight, James McCallman, and 2 secretaries. And 5 of us started working the same day. And back then, we didn't have any rules and did not issue any permits. So the size of the agency has exploded since I started, to say the least.
The main job I had here was to start the permit program over and across the street. And we had at least 2 to 3 of us that first started that program. But much of the effort, maybe you know this, early on was to register sources and give them temporary permits. Primarily, the purpose was to identify all of the sources of air pollution.
We'd ride up and down the road and we'd say, that's a very interesting pile of smoke over there, or there's a new kind of plant I haven't seen before, or a grain mill blowing bees' wings and other detritus all over the neighborhood. And we'd stop and see what kind of process and air pollution control they might have. Rare in those days. But yeah, there were basically 2 or 3 regulations. One, you had to fill out the forms. And one, you weren't supposed to smoke, dark smoke. And then you weren't supposed to open burn. So your chimney or your smokestack or your pile of wood and the air contaminants you could almost walk on were the first things that we thought about, because they were the first things Joe Public thought about.
I was just after all that registration process, so I really didn't get in on that. I started pretty much immediately with learning how to do source testing. I remember my first day here, Tom Allen showed me around, and part of that, he opened a storage room door and showed me some brand new Method 5 equipment that had been purchased. And he said, look at that. So I looked at it. He said, did you look at it? Yeah. Okay, now you're our stack sampling expert. I said, okay. And then they sent me to school and I became a little bit more of an expert. The first year that I ever got involved in enforcement, there were 6 cases. And no, there wasn't a set process.
And our regulations were pretty simple. I think they were in a little pamphlet. You know, there are very few regulations. Open burning was the big deal back in those days.
So sulfur dioxide and ozone came along and joined the rule book and the ambient monitoring technique compendium. Those were the pollutants that were in the rule book, we understood were problems and were the ones that we worked on for quite a number of years, probably 2.5 decades or so.
We've evolved and changed a lot over time. I mean, we were a simple little 3rd floor office over there. In fact, at one time they moved me into the turret there. I could look from Sheila's office into my office, what was my office. We were a small group. And it was interesting, and we've gone to a much more sophisticated program, more sources, more pollutants. But the agency has responded well to that.
The Clean Air Act of 1990, I think, is the one that really got us over the hump. 72, of course, started everything, getting things in place and started us down the road. But 1990 was the one that really got us over the hump, and you know, it required industries to start paying for their emissions, which we'd never done before, and I think that had a lot of impact on getting reductions. You know, they had to start paying every year for their emissions, and you know, they started thinking about what they were doing a little bit more.
The Clean Air Act had very specific requirements, and I think as one of the notable discoveries, if you will, after the 90 amendments were passed was the role that biogenic emissions played in the formation of ozone. And what we learned over time was how much of the total volatile organic compound contribution came from the natural vegetation and the biogenic emissions. So a lot of the requirements for ozone areas were on VOC specific measures, and A lot of times we were scratching our heads of, well, we've got to do this because the Clean Air Act says so, but the science certainly doesn't say so. So that was probably one of the bigger challenges in implementing the Clean Air Act in North Carolina.
We started doing a lot of analysis, modeling, and so forth, and then it progressed to this other project called SAMI, Southern Appalachians Mountains Initiative. And that was, we were pretty heavily involved in that, along with all the other southeastern states. But I think we probably were the primary lead state. That, quite frankly, led to, I think, the Clean Smokestacks Act.
And what the analysis showed was that NOx reductions in the state, taken in a given state, would have the greatest benefit on ozone reductions in a given state. So if you reduce NOx emissions in North Carolina, the greatest benefit would be to North Carolina. And that led, that was part of the technical analysis that supported the passage of the Clean Smokestacks Act of 2002. We were addressing SO2 emissions, but also there were study requirements for mercury reductions from the coal-fired utility sector, as well as looking at carbon dioxide emissions. So it went more broadly than just reducing NOx to achieve ozone standards.
Utilities had by that time, they knew the writing was on the wall. They knew they were going to have to do this stuff. The challenging thing, I think, was getting all the permits right, getting all the stuff in the permits that needed to be in them, and then we just had to follow the schedule and make sure that they were implementing the things they said they were going to do and getting those reductions they were supposed to get.
An excellent example. Brock Nicholson, he was, chief engineer, so he was like, number two guy, number one problem solver.
In the agency, I always looked to Brock Nicholson. He was always that big thinker, big idea man who never took no for an answer, even when his staff were saying, there's no way we can possibly get this done. But he was always pushing us to do better and to think bigger, think bolder. And, he was certainly a role model for me.
A guy named Wells Garden, who was a chemist early on, just in helping me set up for a stack test, taught me how to not micromanage. And that was a valuable lesson.
Tom Allen, I went to see Tom a lot of times about, how do we do this and how do we fix this rule and, should we fix this rule?
Tom was a rock in the agency. Some of the folks that were here when I got here, Vic Copeland, even as a then young technician, believed in what they were doing and worked hard at it.
Of course, Alan Klemick. Alan was an old water quality boy, and they drafted him into air quality, but and I have to be honest, when I first heard that Alan was going to be the director, well, he wasn't the director then, he was the chief of air quality. I said, why? Why'd they pick him? Where did he come from? I just barely knew him. He was in the planning group in water quality. And I don't know if I'd ever even heard his name before they announced he was going to be chief. But Alan, he was a sharp dude. He caught on quickly to what we needed to do, and he was a very good manager.
James McColeman, who was, I don't know whether he was chief or chief engineer or what. This was while we were still a division. He wasn't so much as a mentor, but he knew how to exploit resources and did a remarkable job getting people enrolled in EPA classes and took advantage of the fact that because they were close by, if they had any vacant seats, he'd fill them up.
Gary Four, after a long career with wood products kind of industries, come back into the area, and he was an engineer, chief engineer, program kind of technical problem solver at the time.
First one was Rhonda Hawk, being another admin. She was very helpful when I came to work here, but then she went on maternity leave. So then I had Helen Garner. And I remember the day Helen gave me this thick book of acronyms, like this gave me half to death. I said, do I have to learn these? She said, no, I just want you to have it just in case you need to know what something means. She said, we use a lot of acronyms around here. And in my time with DAQ, I found out we make up acronyms every day.
One that I would talk about is Jim Joy, and Jim was an air director at the state of South Carolina for many years before going on to be a deputy commissioner over all of the environmental programs in South Carolina. We had very close working relationships, especially between North Carolina and South Carolina. And Jim, early on, we worked on first the OTAG process and SAMI and later on the visibility project. He was always one to ask how things were going, how I was doing, and he was also one of those innovators in the region.
And in this business that we have here, it's about helping North Carolina as a whole. And because our program became so good at what it was, people from other states were calling in to tap into the information that we had in our program. So being a part of that was awesome.
It's a great organization for the North Carolina-South Carolina relationship, and it brings EPA into the fold too. And it's a good organization. Glad we've been able to sustain it for all these years. I know the industry people wanted us to come. They wanted us to be there. There were some years where we were kind of lean because of budget, and we didn't get to send but 6 or 8 people, and they were disappointed that we couldn't bring people up there. And I think it was beneficial to staff too to be able to informally get with these people and talk to them and understand where they're coming from as far as what issues they have. And the industry people, a lot of them didn't have just air quality to worry about. They had water quality, air quality, solid waste, hazardous waste. They had all that stuff on them, and that was good for us to understand that we weren't always their primary concern. And I think CAPCA helped out with those relationships.
I think CAPCA is critical. First of all, let me say happy anniversary, CAPCA. And I was, again, blessed to be able to serve on the CAPCA board for a number of years. And I just think that the opportunities that CAPCA presents to have conversations and gives some early heads up on potential issues. You may be able to solve things before it becomes an issue. CAPCA is an incredible opportunity to educate the regulated community. I think you've heard me say, Mike, I don't like operating in gotcha mode. I want you to know what's coming. I want you to understand your permit or understand new rules. And I think our role is helping the regulated community with understanding those, what can be complex requirements, and helping them understand what they need to do to comply.
I tended to like the Myrtle Beach trips, because people would ask me why. Well, we like to go to the Grove Park Inn because of all the ambiance. And I'm going, okay, ambiance, all you can eat shrimp buffet. That's a no-brainer.
I would say some of the more fun times was watching Myra Reese and Keith Overcash trying to outdo each other.
The one story I remember the best was, somehow we got into doing those songs after I did my updates. I don't even remember how that got started.
One of the things we did at CAP committee sometimes was have a little program, and one memorable thing I did, one of the most memorable things we had as a group, and had to get up and sing the song that we made up, which we would never done at an AWMA meeting.
But we progressed, and we got this big group organized for one time, and of course we were going to do a choir, and we're going to have robes. And Vicky somehow wrangled the robes from somebody, and I don't know who was taking care of them, but somehow South Carolina got hold of our robes. And the morning we were going to do this, I got a note slid under my door saying something about, if you want your robes back, you got to do such and such. And so somehow they stole our robes, and we had to, they finally gave them back to us right before we were supposed to go out and do the performance. And so that's the one thing the number one thing I remember about some of our CAPCA stuff.
Everybody has a little something different to bring to the table. And when you take their differences and your difference, and you can gel them together to make a complete program, I think that's awesome. And the directors and the supervisors and all, they all work together to make that come to happen, so that they begin to get the people to gel together. And as a whole, I believe we all enjoy one another, because everybody has something to bring to the table. And just knowing that I could just put a little piece in there to help somebody else out with the program, that was good. I enjoyed my time.